Good morning. Oh,
You're good.
good morning. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really very excited to be here to talk to you all about what we have here at UP Kids, and more specifically what we need here at UP Kids, which is, people to get involved um, with our kiddos in foster care and adoption. So yeah, this being in child welfare, this is actually the third career trajectory for me, which is kind of an interesting one. I never thought that this was going to be something that I would be doing, but I was glad that I fell into it. I really got into it because I took some time off after teaching to be with my family for about 5 years, and felt like, oh boy, I need to get back to work, and licensing foster homes. I just saw an advertisement for the position, and I thought, wow, that sounds like something I could really do. I wasn't really, I guess my heart wasn't in it at that time. It wasn't like, oh, this is my calling. I really just like the licensing aspect reminded me kind of when I was in investigations as a police officer. But then once I got into this and really had that connection with our mission and our purpose and the children and the families that we serve, I was whole in. It's a really gratifying and fulfilling position to be in, to work with our families. So I'd like to tell you, first of all, a little bit about UP Kids as a whole and our organization and the different types of programs that we offer. And then I'd really like to talk a lot more about foster care and adoption, and the children that we serve, the families that we serve, and how you guys as community members can get involved. Um, so yeah, we're really UP Kids. We're an umbrella organization. We have a lot of, we have a lot of different types of programs housed in our little depot building here. We're throughout the UP actually. We have offices in the Sault Ste. Marie and Marquette, uh, Gogebic, Iron Mountain, Escanaba. But our Houghton office here is our main one. So we've been around for a long, long, long time. Goodwill, we began as Goodwill Farm in 1899. So, what is that? Like 125 years. So when we started out, we were an orphanage. We were the orphanage Goodwill Farm. Some of you that have lived in the area for a long time may remember we used to have that big, beautiful, rambling building up on McGinnis Drive that was sold and torn down, sadly. But that was the old orphanage. And then as we saw trends to kind of veer away, we kind of went away from orphanages to foster care and getting children that needs homes in homes rather than a residential setting. Excuse me. We kind of changed our pathway as well. We started we became, or well, we maintained Goodwill Farms for a while, but we started doing foster care, and the old building became a residential facility for kids that couldn't be in their homes. And after a while, I think in 2012 it was, we changed to UP Kids. And a while after that, we moved down to the depot building that's next to the public library in Houghton. And here we are now. So some of the programs that we have, I think our biggest programs, we have a lot of littler ones, but our biggest programs are really the mentoring programs and the foster care adoption placement services programs. So our mentoring programs, and I'm sure that most of you have heard of Big Brothers Big Sisters, and maybe have participated in the Bowl for Kids, the event that they hold in the spring. That's their big fundraiser for the year. So the mentoring programs, it's more than just Big Brothers Big Sisters. So they also have mentoring in schools. It's called the High Five program, where kids are mentored within the schools. But really the big one is the Big Brothers Big Sisters. And I love this program because there's a lot of there's a lot of time and effort put into it to make a really good match. So what happens is adults from the community, men, women, young, old, whatever, come in and they say, hey, I want to donate my time. I want to be a big brother. And anyone can come and sign up. And then Nancy Barando runs that program, and she spends a lot of time interviewing the prospective big and kind of getting to know them and figuring out who would be a good match. And then we also have people from the community who recommend a child be put in this program. Usually it's a kiddo who needs a positive adult influence in their life. Maybe it's maybe they're from a dysfunctional home or single parents. Maybe it's one of our foster kiddos. It's for whatever reason, they don't have enough supportive adults in their lives, and they would really benefit from having a mentor. And so Nancy kind of does her magic. It's like match.com or whatever, and makes this connection and says, oh, okay, I've got this very active young man who's into skiing and hockey, and I've got this very active boy that needs a match, and he's into skiing and hockey, and let's get them together. And it works out really, really well. A lot of our matches, wow, they build this relationship for for a time, but oftentimes it continues for years and years. They keep in connection. Sometimes we get tech students who become a big brother, a big sister, and then when they move from the area, they still communicate. They still keep in touch with that child, and they're really a source of support. I will say, if anyone is interested in becoming involved in big brothers, big sisters, wow, we have a need. We have kids that are waiting to be matched, especially the boys. We match boys to men and girls to women. And we tend to get a lot more young women and women that want to be a big sister than men, which is just it's really very difficult, because we have just as many boys waiting to be matched as we do girls, but girls are generally matched quicker and easier than the boys are. So anyone who's interested, please call, especially if you're a male that's wanting to be matched with a boy to be a mentor. And it's not, I'll tell you what, it's kind of funny when people come into this program, they're like, oh my gosh, what should I do? How can I entertain this kid? Like, oh, we're gonna have to do something spectacular. I'm gonna take him to a Tigers game, or do something really wow. But really, boy, that is not it at all. That's not what they need. I mean, it's fun, yeah, but a walk, hiking in the area, or just hanging out at the park or whatever. I spent some time with one of our foster kiddos last week, and I took him actually. I took him. My dog needed to go to the vet, and so we took my dog to the vet, and then we took him to the dog park and in Hancock, and we just kind of let him run around. And we played with all the dogs, and we spent a couple hours doing that. And he's been talking about it ever since. It was a absolute thrill for him. And so if you're thinking you might want to become involved in that program, it's just not a big, huge, wow kind of thing. Although, that's fine if you want to do that. It's more just being there for a child, being that positive influence, being that mentor, being someone that child can talk to and relate to in a healthy and safe way. Let's see. So some of the other programs we have, in a lot of our, some of the programs, especially with COVID, we haven't been doing them as much. They're still around, maybe they'll get resurrected, but we've always done the Read to Ride program in collaboration with local schools, where kids, read books and And then the local bike shops will give us bikes at cost, and then there's a raffle at the end. I think last time we did it, we had 20 bikes and helmets, and the kids put their, after every book they get to enter their name in the drawing and pick and give out and give out all these bikes, and that's a lot of fun. Although again, COVID, there was a real shortage of bikes, and that was hard to maintain. But let's see, I'm looking at my notes. And we've also done the Read to Ride program in the past, which is in collaboration with the CCISD, where people will donate their cars, and the CCISD will, or the tech center will fix them up, and then we'll be able to give them to families that come to us and might have some need. So that's another one that's kind of fallen by the wayside, but hopefully we can resurrect that. One of our big programs that we have going on is called our PARK program. It's the Post Adoption Resource Center, and this is actually a really amazing program, working with adoptive families. So it's one thing that we really tout with families that go through UP Kids and adopt children through our agency, but we also work with any adoptive families, whether they adopted through UP Kids, whether it was a private adoption or an adoption from foster care. And I should differentiate between that. So a lot of people, a private adoption is when a match is made between a child, usually it's an infant, and a family, and the child is never in foster care or under the care and custody of the state. So a lot of people who want to adopt a baby will go to a private adoption agency and wait to be matched with a family and then adopt that child without state intervention. Foster adoption is when a child comes into foster care and is not, parental rights are terminated, and then that child becomes available for adoption, which I'll talk a whole lot more about permanency and adoption later on. But the great thing about our PARK program, the Post Adoption Resource Center, is it is available for private adoptions, for foster care adoptions, for any agency, for anyone. We just want to be a real support for our adoptive families. And how that works is a lot of times people will call us and, they'll be having whatever issues, and the staff can go out and work with whatever issues that family might be having. A lot of times, say it's issues with school. They can go out and be a support, and they can be an intermediary in the schools, work with the schools to advocate for that child and any special needs they may have. Maybe it's an issue of counseling, and they can help access resources and connect with counselors, connect with therapists, basically whatever kind of issue. Our park staff and our social work staff in general, boy, they're all problem solvers. It's like, hey, what's the issue? How do we fix this? We can make this happen. And so it's nice to have, for the adoptive families, to have that support. They also run, our park organization also runs support groups for adoptive families, for both foster care and adoptive families, to kind of get together and talk about what's going on in the family, and kind of get a little support and advice. A lot of times it's easier for families to connect with each other with someone who's going through the same thing. Or what I really like is when we can make that connection with a foster or adoptive family that's maybe very new to it, with a much more experienced foster and adoptive family that can say, yes, this is hard. I've been through it too. Here's what we did. Here's what worked, and kind of just be that source of support for a family. We also do a lot of events with our families. We're, again, coming out of COVID. We're just getting them rolling again. We did a lot of virtual things for the past couple of years, and it's hard. It's hard to make those connections virtually, especially coming in not knowing people from the get-go. so we're starting to do a lot more in-person events. Like we like to do picnics or picnics at the park, or whatever we can do to kind of get everyone together and let the kids run run around and play and have a good time. And again, one of the things that's really beneficial from those in-person events is those connections, those community connections. So that's our park program. And now I want to talk about foster care and adoption. Actually, before I do, I'll kind of run you through when I work with new families that are new to foster care and adoption, a lot of folks don't have any previous experience with CPS or with Child Protective Services, or children being removed from their home. It's something that a lot of families just have no firsthand experience with. They want to help these kiddos, but don't really understand the process. So generally, when a family is in trouble, whatever the issue is, I'll tell you what, 90 to 95% of the families that we deal with when they're in trouble, it is substance use. We have a real serious and significant substance use issue in our area. I know we like to think, we're a small town, but by God, it's here. Meth primarily. So it's a real issue. And then when you have that substance use issue, it comes along with so many other problems: domestic violence, criminality, poverty, homelessness, not having enough food, not having enough resources, underemployment, unemployment. It all kind of molds in together. And so when these families are in trouble, and if the home is becoming not safe or not healthy for a child, generally what happens is CPS gets the first complaint. They're kind of the first line of defense. But removing a child from a home doesn't happen as often as you might think. It's actually removing that child from the home is a very, very, very last resort. It becomes what's known as an ongoing case. So CPS will get in there and say, hey, we're aware that you're having these issues. What's the problem? How can we help you? What can we do? And they'll provide resources for the family. They'll work with the family. They'll try to fix the issues or help the family fix the issues, support them as they address the issues, to prevent that removal, because we don't want to. Children do best in their own homes and in their own families. And I'm not sure how many of you have had your own families. Everyone has different standards of, what parenting looks like, what a family looks like. And it varies wildly across the board. We're not saying every child should be in this perfect, home with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and yearly trips to Disney World. It's more, is it safe? Is it healthy for this child? So we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for what's best for that child. And so removing is really a last resort. It's got to be to the point where it's patently unsafe for this child to be in this home. They've got to get out right away. So when a removal happens, actually backing up a little bit, I should add this too. We also have our Families Upward program, which is a program that works with families in that stage. So in that stage prior to removal, what can we do? If we can prevent a removal, yay, we're doing a great job. So that's offering resources like, okay, what's your issue? The issue is substance use. How do we combat that? Maybe getting into rehab, maybe offering support groups, whatever we can do. Or, the issue is homelessness. Let me help you. Let me connect you with resources. Let's figure out what we need to do to prevent the child from being removed. But then if it gets to that point where it's no longer safe, CPS will file a petition with the court to remove the child from the home. And that is where foster homes come in. So a foster home generally is a temporary, safe home for a child that has entered foster care. It's ideally it's temporary, because ideally what's going to happen is we're going to be able to work with that family once the child is removed and help them overcome the issues that brought about the removal. So when a child is in foster care, then they get a caseworker, a foster care caseworker, but that caseworker isn't solely working with the child. On the one hand, they're working with the child and the foster family to ensure that all the child's needs are met, that they're safe, that they're cared for. But that caseworker is also working with the biological family of that child to kind of help them overcome whatever issues brought that child into care. Foster care cases, it's never like, I get a lot of foster families that say, oh, I can be a temporary home. But foster care cases are rarely, they're temporary, in the scope of things, but they usually last a year-ish. I would say standard, we kind of have a rule of thumb. It used to be that they would go on and on forever because we keep giving the family chances. We would not want to terminate those parental rights because that's really hard on a child and a family. But then they would go on forever and forever. And then years would go by and children were not having a permanent home. A foster home is not a permanent home. And whether it be through reunification or through adoption, children need permanency. They deserve it. They deserve to have a family that is permanent and committed and not transient. It's not healthy for a child to grow up, to spend 2/3 of their life or a third of their life or whatever in a transient setting. And so we kind of stick to timelines now, in that if we get to a year marker with a foster care case and that family is not making significant strides towards reunification, that's our red flag to file for termination of parental rights. And it's always a very, very difficult thing because these parents, these biological parents that lose their children, love their children. I mean, anyone, if you've had children, you know how much you love your child. These parents love their children in that same way. I mean, I see them love their children in the same way that I love my children. It's not like, oh, whatever, I don't care about this child, I love myself more, whatever. It's again, generally it's that addiction that's so hard to break that even their love for their child is not enough to to bring them through it. So yeah, I digressed and now I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so if the foster care case gets to about a year marker, that's when we say, okay, we need to move on. And then it trails on for even longer generally, where, well, there's court appearances and appeals and so forth. So I would say generally a foster care case lasts about a year. They can go on to 18, 24 months though, and still achieve reunification. But generally once it passes a year, we're terminating rights, or the court is, of course, and looking for permanence for that child. So during that period of foster care, while the caseworker is working with the family and working with the child, we also do supportive visitation and parent parent resource classes. So we really try to maintain that bond between the parent and the child while the child's in foster care. That is so important to make sure that that reunification can happen and happen successfully. So they visit often. We try to have parents and children visit 2, 3, 4 times a week, however many times we can facilitate. Usually at the beginning of the case, especially if the child was injured, or there's been a dangerous situation, the visitation will be supervised. We'll have a worker from UP Kids go and pick up the child and bring them to a agreed upon spot. Sometimes the home, if it is safe. Can you hear the snowmobiles going by? Oh my gosh, I'm right down here at the depot and they zip, zip, zip right by. But they're gone now. Yeah, so anyway, so the visitation worker will pick up the child and then meet the parents. And we use a lot of local spots. It gets hard in the winter, I'll tell you what. In the summer, it's easy. We say, oh, let's meet at the park, let's go here, let's go there. The library has been really good to us, the public library, not the restaurant, for facilitating meeting places. Sometimes we do it at the office, but that's not very exciting for a kid. Or we'll go to, if in Marquette, we'll go to like the Children's Museum, or whatever might be interesting for the family to be together. So we do these visits, and with the goal of, as the case progresses and the parents are kind of getting their act together and figuring out what needs to be done, we move to unsupervised visits where the children are dropped off and then we're not watching and observing everything they're doing. We also do the parent training. We'll have a person that will work with the parent and say, okay, how can you be a better parent? What do you need to do? How does this look? And a lot of it, especially, we don't get manuals for how to be parents, right? We get the most important job in the world, raising children, and there's a lot of people come into it with no idea of how to do it, or how to talk to a child, or how to demonstrate empathy or connect or discipline. And a lot of us, when we have children, we just kind of go with, well, I guess I'll just do it how I was raised. And if we were raised with spanking or emotional abuse, or a really authoritarian my way or the highway, that's kind of what we've absorbed and how we parent. And so our parent teachers try to teach what else might work. I mean, you kind of hate to go in and tell people you're doing it wrong, especially with something as sensitive as parenting. But we like to offer, I guess, more tools for your belt. So whereas your go-to might have been, if my child misbehaves, they get a spanking. And that's just how we do it. Instead, we kind of look at, well, okay, let's maybe look at, why is that child misbehaving? Are they in distress? Are they worried about something? Is there something else that's underlying here? And okay, you need to discipline them. Let's talk about different kinds of discipline. Let's talk about positive types of discipline. Are we modeling behavior, or are we saying, do as I say and not as I do? Are we setting good boundaries? Do we say what we mean and stick to it? Or if they feel negative discipline is appropriate, well then what can we do? Oh yeah, spanking. Okay, what else? What about taking away electronics? My personal favorite. That always got my kids into shape. Or natural consequences. Or there's just that when you take a look at discipline, there's such an array of different ways to mold a child's behavior. And there's no reason to just stick with one particular thing. You can, the more tools in your belt, the better off you are. And a lot of this is talking through it ahead of time too. Safety planning is kind of a buzzword that we use in child welfare. We use it for everything. Safety planning is basically looking at what could happen, and different ways of dealing with it. So for instance, one of our kiddos right now runs away when he is when he has really big feelings. He gets overwhelmed. He's 10, he gets overwhelmed and he bolts. And his foster parents that we just placed him with were very, very concerned, going, I don't know if we can deal with this. What do we do? This is a big thing. This is a big deal, especially given that it's winter time, right? And so we safety planned it. We sat down and we said, let's look at the different things that could happen and what to do about them. And we looked at every scenario. What if he runs and he hides in the house? What if he runs out the door? What if he runs down the street? And kind of just talked about each different scenario and what to do in each different case, which is something that we do across all aspects of child welfare. And in fact, it's something that now I do in my own home, in my own life, with my own family. Okay, we have a worry, we have a concern. Let's hash it out. Let's talk about all the different things that could happen and all the different responses that we might have. So a lot of working with our families is doing just this, is safety planning and saying, here's all the different situations that we're dealing with. What are all the different ways that we can deal with them? So let's see. So really, when we're working with a family, when a child is in foster care and we're working with a family, reunification is our number one goal. I know that there are a lot of cynical people out there that say, oh, the state just wants to take my baby and adopt it out to someone else and we're not a fit parent or whatever. But that's really not that's not the case. Our number one goal is reunification. And by gosh, when we can take that kid and put them back in that biological family, when we know that family is now a safe and healthy home for that child, it's a victory. It's an absolute victory. It's a thrill. That's our absolute number one goal, is reunification. Sometimes though it's not possible. It doesn't happen. The family is not able to get it together. And at that point, when parental rights are terminated, that child becomes available for adoption. So at that point, what we usually do is we look to the foster family, because at that point, that kid's been in that home, in that foster home, for a year or two, and we don't want to move them if it's not necessary. And that's another thing in foster care. Every time a child moves, it's a trauma for that kid. It's taking them away from everything that they know and that they're secure in. And so every move, even when it's from an abusive home, that is a trauma for that child. So one of our biggest goals in foster care is to limit how many times a child is moved from home to home, because it can be so difficult. And that's not always possible. A lot of our kids come into care and they've been through so much that they have big behaviors. They have behavioral issues. They might have medical needs. They might have, different things that foster families don't feel equipped to deal with. And I always tell my foster families that I work with, because I work with them in licensing, which I will talk about. And then I also am the one that call them with possible placements. And so when I call a family, I tell them, hey, I give them the whole unvarnished truth, the good, the bad, and the otherwise, because I want them to make a well thought out decision about whether or not they can have this child in their home. Sometimes we don't have the information, sometimes we have no information. If it's a very sudden removal, we had one of these a few weeks ago where the family hadn't been involved with CPS, but then the incident itself was severe enough that the child was removed immediately. So we had no background on the family. But usually we do. Even with the background that we have, some of our foster families, and I love them so much, they don't think with their heads, they think with their hearts. They are all in. I call them and I say, I've got a child that needs a home. And they immediately say, yes, absolutely. Open the doors, open our hearts, come to our family, which I love, I do, but I wish they wouldn't, because what happens a lot is then, especially if there's maybe children in the home already, that kiddo will move in and there'll be big disruption, and there's going to be some hard to manage behaviors, there's going to be some issues, and it's going to be a lot harder than maybe they thought it would be. And then they're going to look at their biological children that aren't getting along with the new kid, and they're going to say, oh, we need to make a choice here. And you know what that choice is. And then that child's back in care. I'm looking for another home for them. We've had kids that have, jumped from home to home to home. And the more they're moved, each placement is harder. And it's almost like that trust, one of the things that foster families tell kids when they first come in is, hey, you're safe now. You're safe now. I'm going to take care of you. You're going to be okay. We're here for you. But then when that is a temporary thing, they learn they can't trust the adults in their lives. They can't trust the families that they're placed with. And a lot of times we see behaviors when they are building that trust of pushing them away and pushing the boundaries and, trying to make their behaviors so terrible that the family is going to say, almost like a self-sabotage, because they have so little trust and faith, and rightly so, in the homes that they're in. So these kids they go through a lot. So my point was that we really do try to, if at all possible, limit moves from home to home. I mean, yes, we have to make the move from their biological family to the foster family, and then our hope is that they stay in that family until they're either reunified or adopted. And 9 times out of 10, once that child is available for adoption, the foster family says, yes, this is our child, because they've been loving them like their own for the past year and a half. And so generally foster families do adopt the children that are in their homes. So the licensing, I want to talk a little bit about the licensing process. Actually, before I do, since I'm talking about our kiddos, I want to talk a little bit more about the children that we have in care. Is anyone familiar with the ACEs study? Has anyone heard of ACEs? Yes, I see a few nods. Okay, all right. This ACEs study is actually, it's so interesting to me. It started out as an obesity study, and then kind of became this whole social study about what causes all these different social maladies. And a lot of it comes down to the ACEs is adverse childhood experiences. And if you have any interest in this, I'd really recommend doing a little bit of Googling, and you can even take the test to see how many ACEs you have. So they have this list of different types of adverse childhood experiences, things like household dysfunction. Have you had a parent incarcerated, or experienced homelessness, or different things like that, as well as abuse, any types of abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and neglect. And then it divvies up these categories pretty specifically. And the higher your ACEs score, the more you check, the box for yes, this applies to me, the more likely of adverse outcomes later on in life, which is just, it's crazy to me. But you can look at the charts, and I'll send some information out about ACEs later too, because I think it's really interesting. But across the spectrum, physical, mental, emotional, there's a lot of the higher ACEs score corresponds to higher incidence of depression, substance use, STDs, cancer, heart disease, lung disease, diabetes, early mortality, criminal behavior, lower education levels, the likelihood of being raped, impaired job performance, just across the whole spectrum of social and physical maladies can correspond to these ACEs scores. So our kids that come into care, their ACEs scores are huge. They've had all of these different things impact their lives, and we can't go back. There's no going back. There's only going forward. We can't go back and say, well, I wish this didn't happen to you. I wish that you weren't abused. I wish that you weren't neglected. We can wish it all we want, it doesn't change anything. But what we can do is help to kind of counter those ACEs. ACEs, if resilience, having resilient support in a child's life. So having adult connections. We talked about the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. Having that mentor, having that positive influence, having that teacher that sees, oh, okay, I can be your safe space. Having that support by other adults and other safe people in their lives can really mitigate these ACEs scores. And even one adult can make a difference in a child's life. Even just one can really can mitigate those ACEs scores. So yeah, our kiddos, boy, they come into care. They usually have issues. It's hard living the lives that these kids have lived, and not. And I think about it, when they have these big behaviors and they have these big issues, the stuff that they've gone through. I'm a 50-year-old adult from a supportive background and well-educated, whatever. The things that they have gone through, I don't know how I would process it. I don't know how I would absorb these things and deal with the aftermath. And so you look at a little 6, 7, 8-year-old child. They don't have the maturity, they don't have the life experience to process in a healthy way the things that they've been through. And so it's really up to us as their supportive people, as the people that are looking out for them, to help them get through the things that they're getting through. But and that kind of ties back into what I was talking about with discipline. A lot of times the child's behavior is just because it's not that they're trying to act out or trying to be disrespectful or whatever. They're just blowing up because they have all of these things in them that they're not able to deal with. One of the tricks of the trade that I've learned over the years, with dealing with a child that's really kind of out of control, and I learned this from one of my favorite foster parents, and he had this kiddo that, oh gosh, I think the kiddo was like 9 or 10, and he would when they would get into a confrontation, the child would run off. And this guy was he was an ex-Marine, and so he was like, by golly, we're taking care of this right now, we're talking this out right now, and I said so. And so one time this kiddo ran off to his room and crawled under his bed. And so the foster parent, he followed him in there, and he went to pull him out from under the bed so that they could settle this immediately. And the kid, this is awful. The kid punched him in the face as hard as he could. But the foster dad obviously didn't respond in kind. He just kind of said, "Oh my gosh, this is terrible," and walked away. And he called me, and he's like, "Dolores, this kid's out of control." And I'm like, "Wow, Bill, this sounds really awful. Let's talk about this. This is what happened." I said, "Well, if it ever happens again, what do you think? Is this something that you might respond to differently?" Because the child and the foster dad had a terrific relationship. They really did. This kiddo adored him. I said, how would we do it? How do we do it differently? How would we get a different outcome? And he said, I think if it happens again, I might just try to sit with him so that, because the other issue was if he left him alone, he was afraid that he would destroy his room, which is valid. He says, maybe I'll just sit with him next time. I'm like, wow, that sounds reasonable. Well, let's give that a shot. And so he did. We were safety planning, looking at alternatives. So the next time this kid erupted like that, he followed him to his room, and he just sat on the floor next to the bed, and he said, "I'm here with you." And then after a while, he reached in and he put his hand on the kiddo's back. He just sat there, and he said he probably sat there for like a half hour, 45 minutes. And then the kid came out and he was calmed down and he talked it through. I'm like, wow, success. So yeah, a lot of our kiddos, they come into care, they have things that they are trying to deal with and that they're trying to grapple with. Um, ugly things that most adults that are caring for them couldn't imagine going through themselves. And so it really takes patience and consistency and a lot of love. And I guess that's my point, is that these kids, that they're broken, but they're not, they can be put back together with the adults in their lives that are able to come in and be there for them and provide that loving, stable, healthy home. So I really wandered off because I was talking about adoption. Yeah, I do that. So a lot of our children are adopted by their foster families, but we also have a lot of kiddos that aren't, and inevitably there are harder to place kiddos. So if we get a child in care that is some adorable little 2-year-old, that child's going to be adopted like that. And when we do, when a child is available for adoption, just like with foster care, the first place we look is relatives. So we might we do genealogy searches with the family to learn about who the relative options might be, and we want to place them with relatives, but that's not always possible. So, oh gosh, I'm just looking at the time. I want to talk about licensing too. So a lot of our children are harder to place because maybe they have some issues, or maybe they have special needs, either medical or otherwise, or if they're part of a sibling group. We have a lot of foster homes that say we can take 1 or 2 kiddos, but then when we get a sibling group of 4 or 5, we want to keep those children together, and that can be hard. Our hardest group to place is teenagers, which I'll tell you what, teenagers are great, and our foster teenagers get a bad rap. I think people look at them like, oh, they're a foster kid and they're a teenager. Oh, they're terrible. They're going to do whatever terrible thing. But these kids aren't in foster care because of things that they've done. They're in foster care because of things that their parents have done. And this is a really important time for them because they're just learning how to become an adult themselves, and to be kind of out there and not have a home and not have the mentoring and not have someone to show you, how do you study in school? How do you make friends? How do you date? How do you apply for colleges? How do you look for your own apartment? How do you transition into adulthood? And so our teenagers, they need those relationships and that guidance, and they need homes and families that will love them, even though they're maybe not as cute as the toddler that everybody wants to have. Our teenagers need homes. So very briefly, because I really want to have some questions too, and I'm sure you have questions. The licensing process to be a foster family, you go through training. There's quite a bit of training. Most of it's online. There's home visits. We're basically making sure that the home is a healthy, safe home for a foster child. And we vet our foster parents because we want them to be able to be a support for that child. And we also don't want to, we look at relationships because we don't want the child coming into the home to fracture the family, so if for instance it's a shaky marriage, I don't know that I would want to add another stressor to a shaky marriage, because then when it breaks up, what happens? The child goes. So if anyone is interested in becoming a licensed foster home, there's so much more to it, and I've spent too much time rambling I didn't have good time management this morning. I apologize. Um, but if you are interested in being a licensed foster home, we absolutely need licensed foster homes, people that are willing to take children, people that are willing to, and this is really important because we do get a lot of families that say, okay, yes, I'll take a child, but I don't think I can deal with giving them up at the end of a year. Because I'll tell you what, it is hard. You love that child like your own, and then to have to give them up to go back to a place that was maybe not, maybe you don't think is where it should be, or it's not to the standard of your home, and to send your child that you love to that situation, it's terrifying and it's hard. And even when the situation isn't bad, it's still really hard to give that child up. Um, and it is, there's no getting around that. It's really, really a hard part of foster care, and yet how meaningful for that child, and the love and the support and the safety that that child had well in that home, in that foster home, that's part of their lives, that's part of their heart, that's part of their makeup for the rest of their lives, that you built a puzzle piece in that child. So anyway, a lot of families will say, yes, we'll take children, but we only want to adopt, which I completely understand, and that's okay, and that's fine. But what we really need is families that will step up and take children and say, yes, we want to help reunify this child with their family. We want to help build this family. We are going to support the reunification process. And when that happens, we're going to celebrate along with everybody else and say, this family is reunified. So we have a real need for people that are willing to be that temporary foster family to go for our goal of reunification. And a lot of people, hey, it's a 24/7, it's a lifetime commitment. It is a big thing to commit to be a foster family. And so some people don't feel ready for that kind of commitment. I'll tell you what else we need. We also need families that can be respite for our foster families. So when they have a child that they need a bit of a break, a family that will say, yeah, we'll take Johnny for the weekend, or or an afternoon, or whatever. So a family that can say, yes, we will take this child. We'll be his grandma and grandpa for the weekend. We'll do things with him and keep him occupied and have a good time. Families sometimes do it as they need a break, or we just recently had where the foster family, one of the parents in another state was very ill, and they had to go see this parent, and so the child was in a respite home for a few days. That's a lot easier than the licensing process. That's a much quicker and easier process. It's just a check of the home to make sure that it's safe. Check through iChat and Central Registry, and you can be a respite family. So I've given you a couple of different opportunities to get involved, possibly as a foster family, a respite family, big brothers, big sisters. There's all kinds of ways to become involved. And I will say this, I appreciate the generosity. So many people in our community are so generous and donate, backpacks and blankets and pajamas and money and different things. And our organization really does appreciate that. However, what we really, really, really need is your time. We need people to make connections with our children that are struggling, and be that resilient support, and be that person that could change their lives. I'm sure you've all heard the starfish story. I love it though. It's cliche, I realize it, but I love it, about the little boy that's walking along the beach, and there's all these starfish that are stranded on the beach, and the old man walks up to him, and the little boy's taking the starfish and flinging them into the ocean, and the old man walks up to him and says, "What are you doing?" And the little boy says, "Well, the tide is going out, and these starfish are stranded, and I'm throwing them back into the ocean." And the old man says, "But look, there are thousands, millions of starfish along this beach. and you can't save them all. But the little boy picks up the starfish and he flings it into the ocean. And he said, yeah, but I saved that one. And that's kind of what I'm appealing for today, is if you can make a connection with one child, hey, you saved that one, right? So yeah, with that, I would really love, am I out of time? Am I gonna get kicked off? Can I take questions?
Please do. Please do.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions?